Okay, carbon dating, radiocarbon dating method. Introduction. This tool of radiocarbon dating has become quite widely used and falsely accepted in recent years, and is important to our study about age dating of things, since it professes falsely to supply absolute dates for events within the past 30 or 40,000 years. This, of course, covers the apparent periods of biblical history as well as more recent dates, and so bears directly upon the question of the flood and other related events. The formation of radiocarbon, that is carbon-14, the radioactive isotope of ordinary carbon from cosmic radiation, was first discovered by Serge Korff, an authority on cosmic rays, describing the carbon-14 dating method, which has resulted from it. Korff says, cosmic ray neutrons produced secondary particles in the atmosphere by the original radiation are captured by nitrogen nuclei to form the radioactive isotope of carbon, the isotope of mass 14. This isotope has a long half-life, something around 5,500 years, but the applications of some very well thought out techniques. Libby and his colleagues have actually not only identified the radiocarbon in nature, but have also made quantitative estimates thereof. Since the carbon in the atmosphere mostly becomes attached to oxygen to form carbon dioxide, and since the carbon dioxide is ingested by plants and animals and is incorporated in their biological structures. And further, since this process stops at the point of death of the specimen, when the specimen ceases to ingest any further carbon dioxide, the percentage of radiocarbon among the normal carbon atoms in its system can supposedly be used to establish the date at which the specimen stops metabolizing. Serge A. Korff writes, in his original Origin and Implications of the Cosmic Radiation, American Scientist, he writes, it is presumed that today's rate of absorption of carbon-14 into the atmosphere via cosmic radiation has remained constant throughout the presumed millions of years of the Earth's existence. Puzzling. So a plant, when it was alive, would reflect the proportion of C14 to normative carbon at the particular time of its existence, later times to have an ever-increasing proportion of C14 as reflected in the dead organic matter of those times. Therefore, the higher the percentage of carbon-14 to normal carbon in the fossil remains will indicate a younger age in which that living matter once lived, according to evolutionists and uniformitarianists. We have a problem. False assumptions made in the carbon dating method. There is no doubt that this carbon dating method constitutes a very ingenious and powerful dating tool, provided only that the inherent assumptions are valid. Kulp lists the assumptions as follows. There are two basic assumptions in the carbon-14 method. One is that the carbon-14 concentration in the carbon dioxide cycle is constant. The other is that the cosmic ray flux has been essentially constant, at least on a scale of centuries. J.L. Cupp in his study, Scientific Monthly. To which we might add the assumption of the constancy of the rate of decay of the carbon-14 atoms, the assumption that dead organic matter is not later altered with respect to its carbon content by any biologic or other activity, the assumption that the carbon dioxide content of the ocean and atmosphere has been constant with time, the assumption that the huge reservoir of oceanic carbon has not changed in size during the period of applicability of the method, and the assumption that the rate of formation and the rate of decay of radiocarbon atoms have been in equilibrium throughout the period of applicability, which has been proven false. Every one of these assumptions is a highly questionable idea in the context of the events of creation and the worldwide flood deluge. But it is falsely maintained by evolutionists that the method has been verified beyond any question by numerous correlations with known dates. Here, an observation by Libby himself is interesting and in point. The first shock Dr. Arnold and I had was that our advisors informed us that the history of mankind's civilizations extended back only 5,000 years. We had thought, initially, that we would be able to get samples all along the curve back to 30,000 years. Then we'd put the points in, and then our work would be finished. You read books and find statements that such and such a society or archaeological site is 20,000 years old. We learned rather abruptly that these numbers, these ancient ages, are not known. In fact, it is at about the time of the first dynasty in Egypt that the last historical date of any real certainty had been established. W.F. Libby, Radiocarbon Dating, American Scientist. It is obvious, therefore, that any genuine correlation of the radiocarbon method with the definite historical chronologies is limited only to some time after the flood and dispersion. The major assumptions in the method are evidently valid for this period, but this does not prove their validity for more ancient times, the periods in which we would infer that the assumptions are very likely wrong and therefore the dating also wrong. You got the flood period, the clouds, the water above, presumed could be inhibiting the radiation effect on the Earth with all that water above. Attempts to apply the carbon-14 method to earlier datings have, in fact, been called in serious question by evolutionary geologists for entirely different reasons than our own. One reason of which is that the carbon dating method conflicts with their falsely established geological timescale and must be rejected because it refutes their false agenda of evolution, which has no scientific proof, but they want to keep it intact regardless. Charles B. Hunt, recent president of the American Geological Institute, has cautioned, in order that a technique or discipline may be useful in scientific work, its limits must be known and understood. But the limits of usefulness of the radiocarbon age determinations are not yet known or understood. No one seriously proposes that all the determined dates are without error, but we do not know how many of them are in error. 25? As many as 50? 75%? We do not know which dates are in error, or by what amounts, or why. That hardly sounds like scientific basis for determining things. Charles B. Hunt, Radiocarbon Dating in the Light of Stratigraphy and Weathering Processes, Scientific Monthly. Hunt emphasizes particularly the dangers of contamination of the sample by external sources of carbon, especially in damp locations. Evolutionist and geologist Dr. Ernst Antevs has sharply criticized the radiocarbon method because it contradicts his estimated dates for the glacial period, which are based on his highly suspect Varve clay calculations. But his point about the unreliability of the carbon-14 dating method is nevertheless well taken. Here he states, in appraising carbon-14 dates, it is essential always to discriminate between the carbon-14 age and the so-called actual age of the sample. Notice his determination to present his own unverifiable method as actual. The laboratory analysis determines only the amount of radioactivity carbon present. However, the laboratory analysis does not determine whether the radioactive carbon is all original or is it in part secondary, intrusive, added later, or whether the amount has been altered in still other irregular ways besides by natural decay. You have some deposits here or there right near a body of water, ebb and flow of the water. Ernst Antevs, in his study, Conference on Radiocarbon Dating held 1956, resulted in the following conclusions about the reliability of the method. Local variation, especially in shells, can be highly significant. Possible variations in the size of the exchange reservoir under glacial climates are unimportant. Sam mentioned that. Movement of water. The most significant problem is that of biological alteration of materials in the soil. This effect grows more serious with greater age. To produce an error of 50% in the age of a 10,000-year-old specimen would require the replacement of more than 25% of the carbon atoms. For a 40,000-year-old sample, the figure is only 5%, while an error of 5,000 years can be produced by only about 1% of the modern materials. Much more must be done on chemical purification of samples. Sounds like the wild, wild west of science. Johnson, Arnold, and Flint, radiocarbon. Problem of atmospheric contamination by fossil fuels has come in for some consideration. Some of the burning coal and oil during the past century and more has added measurably to the amount of carbon dioxide in the carbon style. This means that the standard figures as to present content of carbon dioxide in the exchange reservoir of carbon on which radiocarbon age calculations are based are incorrect with respect to conditions under which older specimens were found and have since been decaying. Although this might be corrected approximately by modifying the standard to one before the Industrial Revolution, the following caution is also in order. Since completion of the present list, of a careful study has been made of a series of samples of known age. It was found that the activity of radiocarbon in the atmosphere was going up and down even before the Industrial Revolution.